Going to solve question 73, set matrix 0 from Leetcode in time complexity n by n and constant space complexity. Let's go through the question. So the question is saying, given an n by n integer matrix, if an element is equal to 0, set its entire row and column to 0. You must do it in place. So what does it mean? So let's say we have this example. So it's saying if one of the elements in the matrix is equal to 0, we should set the whole row and column equal to 0, as you see it here. And another example, so we have 0 here, so we are going to set the whole row and this column to 0, and we have 1 0 here, so we are going to set this row and this column equal to 0, as you see it here. So you might say, okay, that's easy. The way we can do that is like we are going to iterate over the matrix and store the indices for that row and column that they are equal to 0, and we iterate over the matrix again and set those rows and columns to 0. That's a great solution, and I believe it's gonna have a very good time complexity. But what we are going to do here is we are going to do it in place, which means we cannot use extra space, and we should do it in constant space complexity. So let's see how we can do this. Okay, here in this example, I will show you we are going to do this in 4 steps, and what I mean by 4 steps is, in the first step, we are going to consider the first row and the first column as our marker. So instead of having extra space, we are going to use this row and this column as our marker to see what its indices needs to be equal to 0. And to do that, we are going to iterate over the matrix. But there is one thing that we need to know here. We are going to iterate over the matrix, but we skip to iterate over the first column. We can do it another way too. We can skip to iterate over the first row and iterate over the rest of the matrix. And the reason is that if one of these elements are equal to 0, the whole row is going to be equal to 0, and we are going to use that column and the first column and the first row as our marker. And so after iterating over the matrix like this, then we are going and now we know, okay, what indices are equal to 0. Then we are going to iterate over this part of the matrix and use this row and this column, which is the first row and first column, as our marker. And then we need to make sure that the first row and the first column are doing the right condition. So we're going to do this in 4 steps. You might be a bit confused now, so we're going through the example and the code, and it's going to be easier to understand. Okay, here is the first step here. So as I mentioned, we are going to iterate over this part and kind of this part. But what we are looking for here is just to see if there is 1 0, and if there is 1 0, that's enough for us, because we know we are going to set the whole column to 0. So for that reason, we are going to use a flag, and we are going to equal that flag to false. And while we are iterating over the matrix, we are going to check every single cell, and if it is equal to 0, we are going to change that flag to true, and that's about it. And for the second part of the step 1, we are going to iterate over from the second column, as you see. So we don't need to iterate over the first column because we already did that here. Okay, so here is the example. So we are going to iterate over Okay, this is not equal to 0, this is not equal to 0, this is not equal to 0, and this is equal to 0, and this is equal to 0. What we are going to do, we are going to make this and these elements equal to 0, as you see it here. So it says if the matrix in index I and j are equal to 0, we are going to set matrix I and j and 0 and I and 0 equal to 0. Okay, so these are equal to 0 now, and this is not equal to 0, this is not equal to 0, but we see a 0 here, so we are going to set the flag to true. This is not equal to 0, it's not equal to 0, no, and here another 0, so we are going to set this one and this one equal to 0. Okay, and there we go, we are done with the first step, and now we are going to the second step. For the second step, as I mentioned, we are going to iterate over this part of the matrix only, and we are going to use these markers as a marker to see if we need to change that element in that cell equal to 0. So as you see, is we are going to start from 1, which is indices 1 here, and from indices 1 here, as you see here, and we are going to check if any of these are equal to 0, then we are going to set that element equal to 0. So let's iterate over the matrix. Here you see this is the 1, but we have a 0 here, so because of this we are going to set this to 0. This is already 0, this is 1, but because we have this, so we are going to set this to 0. How about this one? We are going to set this 0 because we have 0 here. How about this one? The same and the same thing. And how about this one? We have 0 here, so we are going to set this to 0. How about this one? We have 0 here and we have 0 here. So this is already 0, so we are not going to do anything, but we have OR case here. So either in the first row or the first column, if they are equal to 0, we are going to set that element to 0 and continue doing that, and there we go, we are done with this part. And the third part, as I mentioned, we need to check the first row and make sure that the first row is set, if the first one needs to be set to 0. So as you see here, we are going to check just this element because it's equal for the column and the row. This is the only common element that we have here, and we are going to check that, and it's equal to 0. So we are going multiply 0 by n, which is n is the length of the first row of the matrix. So we are going to iterate over this and set all to 0. And the fourth step is we are going to check this column to see if the flag is equal to true. And the flag is equal to true, so we need to iterate over single one of this and make it equal to 0. We don't need to do that in this case, in this example, and but anyway, because this is true, the program is going to iterate over every single one of this and make it equal to 0. And that's about it. And it's going to return this matrix. And the most important thing here is to have constant time complexity. Thank you.